We have the database set up, and we're now ready to actually implement the code that lets us create a new pick. So we click here and we go to the new pick.php file, which will present us with the form into which we can type the text for the new item that's going to be stored in the database. And I will give it some basic information as soon as the form appears. I'm going to name it test, and just for the ease of testing, I will type in dummy values for each of the fields, and you'll see why this helps with debugging. And let me select a state or province, go to the west of Canada, and the zone is going to be Plattsburgh, and I'm going to call it home. I click on Add Pick, and now I will send that form to the Add Pick PHP file. And this is the file that is now executing. And let's take a look at what's in that file. Inside the file are the standard headers here. And then, as I mentioned, we are unloading all of the variables that came over in the form, and we are setting them either to a variable inside this file or to a blank string. I come down here after all of this code. This is all repetitious code, one line or one set of lines for each variable. And then we come down here to the section of code that actually does the job. And what I'm going to do is, first of all, to execute an SQL query that counts the number of records in the database now where the name matches the name that has just been passed in for a new pick. This is the common pair of lines of code that you'll see for all of the database calls that you're using. First of all, you construct the SQL code, and then you are connecting to the database using that connection, and you are then executing the query using that string, count SQL in this case, and the connection, or you fail if you can't do that. Now, in the case where you are retrieving data, you will be getting data back, and one way of getting it back is by calling MySQL fetch array, and we look at the result is converted into a row. We look at row 0, and if the count, which is the value in row 0, is equal to 0, when I found all of the records with a name identical to the name that was passed in, if the count is 0, then, as the comment says here, it's okay to add. I can insert that data. If the count is not 0, that means I already have a pick with this value in the database, and I'm going to call an error routine. So what's happening down here is we're checking to see if we can add the data. This is a very, very common process as you are adding data to a database. See if the data is complete. You can do error checking on the form itself. You can also do error checking here to see if it will be a duplicate or if in some way it will be a violation of the rules of the database. And if it's okay, then you construct another SQL string, and you select the database, and you then execute the query. And in this case, we don't have to worry about the result because we're not retrieving data. We are executing that query. There is some code here that I've collapsed, and we're not going to look at it yet. But if everything is okay, then we execute a redirect to another page. Here, this else statement comes at the end of this if, which means that we execute the following line of code, which is another redirect in case I had an error, and in that case, the error was a duplicate name. This is the guts of the code that we are executing. All of this above it is just unloading the form and putting it into local variables. Here is where we check to see if we can add the data, and if we can, then we insert it into the table. I'll go in more detail into these lines of code, but that's all that's happening here. We do some error checking. If it's okay, we construct the SQL, select the database, and then execute the query. It's the same sequence we did up here with the counting. We construct the SQL, select the database, and then execute the query.